The courtroom in Havenport, Oregon, was a tomb of silence, every breath held as Judge Margaret Ellison's gavel crashed down. Jake Sullivan, 38, a K-9 officer with a chiseled jaw and eyes heavy with betrayal, sat in the defendant's chair, wrists bound by cold steel cuffs. His German shepherd Blaze, 4 years old with a coat like midnight and eyes that missed nothing, stood rigid at the back of the room, his gaze locked on Jake. "Jake Sullivan," Judge Ellison said, her voice cutting through the tension. "You are hereby found guilty of evidence tampering and obstruction of justice, sentenced to 12 years. A gasp rippled through the gallery. Jake's head bowed, not from the weight of the verdict, but from the thought of losing Blaze. His partner, his confidant through countless nights chasing down Havenport's criminals, was about to be torn from him. Blaze let out a low, mournful whimper, his claws clicking faintly against the polished floor. Jake's voice, rough with emotion, broke the stillness. "Your Honor, please," he said, standing despite the bailiff's glare. "Before I'm taken away, let me say goodbye to Blaze. Just one moment." The courtroom murmured, a mix of shock and sympathy. Judge Ellison studied Jake, her stern face softening for a fleeting second. 2 minutes, she said firmly. No more. A bailiff unclipped Blaze's leash, and the dog sprinted forward, a black and tan blur. Jake dropped to his knees, pulling Blaze into a tight embrace. "I'm so sorry, buddy," he whispered, his voice cracking as tears welled. "I let you down. I won't be there for you anymore." Blaze nuzzled Jake's chest, but then his body tensed, his nose twitched, sniffing frantically at Jake's jacket. A sharp bark shattered the solemn air, echoing off the wood-paneled walls. Blaze tugged at the fabric, his teeth bared, barking louder, more insistent. "What's he doing?" Judge Ellison demanded, leaning forward. The bailiff, a young officer named Tom, hesitated before stepping closer. "He's trained to detect contraband, Your Honor. Let me check." He reached for Jake's jacket, his hands shaking slightly. The room held its breath as he patted the lining. A faint metallic clink. Tom froze, then pulled out a small silver recording device, no bigger than a key fob. The prosecutor, Victor Hayes, a slick man in his 40s with a forced smile, shot to his feet. "This is irrelevant," he snapped, his voice too loud, too quick. "That wasn't logged as evidence." Blaze barked again, his stance rigid, as if daring Hayes to move closer. Jake stared at the device, his heart pounding. "Blaze, what did you find?" he whispered, a flicker of hope igniting in his chest. Judge Ellison's eyes narrowed. "Officer, pick it up," she ordered. "Play it. Now." Tom fumbled with the device, his fingers clumsy under the weight of every stare. A crackle of static filled the room, followed by a voice, low and deliberate. "Sullivan's too clean. Plant the drugs in his locker. No one will question it." Gasps erupted. Jake's blood ran cold. He knew that voice. Captain Victor Hayes, his own boss. The man who'd mentored him, shared beers with him, now exposed as a traitor. Hayes' face drained of color, his protest dying in his throat. "Enough!" Judge Ellison slammed her gavel. "This court is adjourned. Secure that device as evidence. Sullivan, you're staying in holding until we sort this out." As bailiffs moved toward Jake, Blaze pressed against his side, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Jake knelt, cupping Blaze's face. "You saved me, boy," he said, his voice thick with gratitude. "But this isn't over." The courtroom buzzed with chaos, but one question burned brighter than the rest. What else was on that recorder? And who else was involved in framing Jake Sullivan? The rain-slicked streets of Havenport, Oregon, glowed under flickering streetlights, a city choking on its own secrets. 2 years ago, before the courtroom nightmare, Jake Sullivan strode through the bustling precinct, his German shepherd, Blaze, trotting faithfully at his side. Jake, 36 then, was a K-9 officer with a reputation for getting results, his broad shoulders and quiet intensity earning respect from rookies and veterans alike. But beneath the badge was a man haunted. His younger sister Ellie had died a decade earlier, a victim of Havenport's opioid epidemic, her case still unsolved. Blaze, a 4-year-old German shepherd with a coat like polished obsidian, wasn't just a partner. He was Jake's lifeline, trained to sniff out narcotics and track suspects with uncanny precision. Together they'd busted dealers, saved lives, and faced down danger without flinching. Their bond was unspoken, sealed in late-night patrols and shared silences. Inside the precinct, the air buzzed with the clatter of keyboards and the low hum of radios. Emily Carter, 32, a sharp-eyed detective with a knack for reading people, leaned against Jake's desk, sliding him a steaming coffee. Her dark hair was pulled back, her expression a mix of warmth and worry. She'd been Jake's closest ally since the academy, the only one he trusted with his suspicions about the department. "You're digging too deep into that fentanyl case," Emily said, her voice low. "Captain Hayes is watching you like a hawk." Jake took a sip, his jaw tight. "Someone's got to stop this poison from spreading, Em. Ellie deserved better." "This city does too." Blaze nudged Jake's hand, his warm muzzle a grounding force. Jake scratched behind the dog's ears, a faint smile breaking through. "Right, boy. We're not backing down." Across the room, Captain Victor Hayes, 52, stood in his office doorway, his polished uniform and easy charm masking a colder edge. His gaze lingered on Jake, his smile thin, like a predator sizing up prey. Hayes was a department legend, but Jake had started noticing cracks, case files disappearing, informants silenced, and whispers of payoffs. He'd kept his suspicions quiet, but they gnawed at him. "Keep your head down, Jake," Emily warned, her eyes flicking toward Hayes. "He's got friends in high places." "Like Lillian Monroe." Jake's brow furrowed. Lillian Monroe, a city councilwoman in her 40s, was Havenport's golden child, all polished speeches and promises to clean up the streets. Jake had met her once at a precinct fundraiser, her handshake firm, but her eyes distant. "Monroe's just a politician," he said. "Hayes is the one running this show." Emily shook her head. "Don't be so sure. They're tight, and neither likes you poking around." The memory faded, replaced by the cold reality of the present. Jake sat in a holding cell beneath the courthouse, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. His wrists still ached from the cuffs, but his mind was on Blaze, kennelled somewhere nearby. The recording device, now locked in evidence, was a lifeline, but it raised more questions than answers. Why had Hayes framed him? And what did Blaze's instincts uncover? The cell door clanged open. Emily stepped in, her face pale but resolute, her detective's badge glinting on her belt. Blaze trailed behind her, his leash loose in her hand. The dog bounded to Jake, pressing against him with a soft whine. "Blaze," Jake murmured, burying his face in the dog's fur. "God, I thought I'd lost you." Emily crouched beside them, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jake, that recorder wasn't in your jacket during the trial. Someone planted it, after you were arrested." Jake's eyes narrowed, his pulse quickening. Hayes? Maybe, but there's more. Emily hesitated, then reached into her coat pocket, pulling out a folded piece of paper. Blaze wouldn't stop sniffing my bag when I picked him up. I found this tucked inside. Jake unfolded the note, his heart sinking. Scrawled in jagged handwriting were 3 words: Hayes isn't alone. The ink was fresh, the edges crisp, as if written hours ago. Who slipped this to you? Jake asked, his voice low, urgent. Emily shook her head. I don't know, but whoever it is, they're close. And they're scared. Blaze's ears twitched, his body tensing as footsteps echoed down the hall. Jake tucked the note into his pocket, his mind racing. Hayes was dirty, but this hinted at a bigger player, someone with enough pull to orchestrate a frame job and silence a courtroom. Lillian Monroe's name flashed in his mind, her polished smile now sinister. We need to get you out of here, Emily said, her voice fierce. That recorder's just the start. If Hayes is involved, he won't stop until you're buried. Jake met her gaze, his resolve hardening. He ruffled Blaze's fur, drawing strength from the dog's steady presence. Then we dig deeper, Em. For Ellie, for Blaze, for everyone they've hurt. As the footsteps grew closer, Blaze let out a low growl, his eyes fixed on the door. The truth was out there, but so was danger. And Jake knew one thing for sure. He and Blaze were just getting started. The holding cell beneath Havenport's courthouse smelled of damp concrete and despair, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows on Jake Sullivan's face. He sat on the edge of a metal bench, his broad frame hunched, replaying the courtroom chaos in his mind. The recording device, uncovered by Blaze's relentless barking, had turned his guilty verdict into a question mark. Captain Victor Hayes' voice, cold and calculating, echoed in his head. Plant the drugs in his locker. But the note Emily found, Hayes isn't alone, was a splinter under his skin. Who else was pulling the strings? Blaze, kenneled in a nearby room, paced restlessly, his claws clicking against the floor. Jake could hear the faint whine of his partner, a sound that tugged at his heart. He'd promised Blaze they'd get through this, but the walls of this cell felt like they were closing in. The truth was out there, but so was a trap. The cell door clanged open, and Emily Carter stepped inside, her detective's badge glinting under the dim light. Her dark eyes were sharp with urgency, but her face carried the weight of something unspoken. Blaze followed, his leash loose in her hand, his black and tan coat gleaming despite the grim surroundings. The German shepherd bounded to Jake, pressing his warm muzzle against Jake's hand. Blaze, my boy, Jake said, his voice thick with relief as he ruffled the dog's fur. You're keeping me sane in here. Emily crouched beside them, her voice low and tense. Jake, we don't have much time. The judge is holding you until they verify the recorder, but Hayes is already spinning this. He's claiming the device was tampered with. Jake's jaw tightened, his fingers pausing on Blaze's neck. Of course he is. He's got the whole precinct in his pocket. But that note? Em? Who slipped it to you? Emily's gaze flickered, her hands fidgeting with Blaze's leash. I don't know. I checked my bag after I left you last night, and it was just there. Someone in the courthouse, maybe even the precinct. But Jake, there's something else. She reached into her coat, pulling out a small battered burner phone. Its screen was cracked, but it lit up with a single message. Stop digging, or you'll end up like Ellie. Jake's breath caught, his sister's name hitting like a punch. Ellie's death 10 years ago, an overdose ruled accidental, had driven him to join the force, to fight the poison flooding Havenport. The idea that it wasn't random, that someone was using her name to threaten him, made his blood boil. "Who sent this?" Jake demanded, his voice low but fierce. He grabbed the phone, his knuckles whitening. "And why bring up Ellie?" Emily shook her head, her voice trembling. "I don't know, Jake. I found the phone in my car this morning, tucked under the seat. Whoever's doing this, they're close. They know where I've been, what I'm carrying." Blaze's ears twitched, his body tensing as he sniffed the air. He let out a sharp bark, his nose zeroing in on Emily's bag, still slung over her shoulder. Jake frowned, his instincts kicking in. "What's he got, Em?" Emily hesitated, then unzipped the bag. Blaze's nose dove inside, nudging past her notebook and keys. His teeth clamped onto a small, folded piece of paper, tugging it free. Jake took it, his heart pounding as he unfolded it. The handwriting matched the first note, jagged and hurried. "Check Hayes' desk, second drawer." "This is no coincidence," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Someone's feeding us clues, but why hide? Why not come forward?" Emily's face paled. "Because they're scared, Jake. Whoever this is, they're risking everything. And if Hayes is involved, they're not just scared of him. There's someone bigger." Blaze growled softly, his eyes fixed on the cell door. Footsteps echoed in the hall, heavy and deliberate. Emily stuffed the note and phone back into her bag, her movements quick. "We need to move fast," she said. "If we can get to Hayes's desk before he covers his tracks, we might find something to tie him to the frame job." Jake nodded, his mind racing. Hayes's office was a fortress. Locked files, surveillance, and his loyal lapdog, Detective Mark Lucas, always hovering. But the mention of Ellie had lit a fire in him. This wasn't just about clearing his name anymore. It was personal. "Em, you can't go alone," Jake said, his voice urgent. "If Hayes catches you snooping, he'll bury you too." Emily met his gaze, her eyes fierce. "I'm not letting you rot in here, Jake. You and Blaze are family. I'd do anything to get you out." Jake's chest tightened, the weight of her loyalty hitting hard. He knelt beside Blaze, cupping the dog's face. "You hear that, boy? We've got Em on our side, but we gotta be smart." Blaze's tail thumped once, his intelligent eyes steady. The footsteps grew closer, and a shadow loomed outside the cell. Emily stood, her hand brushing Jake's shoulder. "I'll check the desk tonight," she whispered. "Stay sharp, Jake. And keep Blaze close." As the door swung open, revealing a stone-faced bailiff, Jake's mind churned. The note, the phone, Blaze's instincts. They were pieces of a puzzle, but the picture was still murky. Hayes was dirty, but the real question was who he answered to. Lillian Monroe's name surfaced again, her polished image now tainted by suspicion. Was she the puppet master, or just another cog in Havenport's corrupt machine? The bailiff motioned for Emily to leave, but Blaze lingered, pressing against Jake's leg as if reluctant to go. "Go with Em, boy," Jake said, his voice soft but firm. "Keep her safe." Blaze let out a low whine, then followed Emily, his head high, every step purposeful. As the cell door slammed shut, Jake leaned back against the wall, the note's words burning in his mind. Hayes isn't alone. He clenched his fists, a new resolve settling in. Whoever was behind this, they'd underestimated one thing: the bond between him and Blaze. And that bond was about to tear their world apart. But outside, in the precinct's parking lot, Emily paused by her car, her breath visible in the chilly night air. She glanced at the burner phone, its screen now dark. A new message buzzed through, chilling her to the bone. "You're already too late." Her heart raced as she looked around, the shadows of Havenport closing in. Someone was watching, and the game had just gotten deadlier. The air in Judge Margaret Ellison's chambers was thick with tension, the faint hum of Havenport's courthouse barely audible through the heavy oak door. Jake Sullivan sat across from the judge, his wrists still raw from the cuffs, his heart pounding as the recording device sat on the desk between them. Blaze, his German shepherd, lay at his feet, ears twitching, as if sensing the storm about to break. Emily Carter stood by the door, her detective's badge glinting, her face a mask of determination despite the fear in her eyes. Judge Ellison, her silver hair pulled back tightly, pressed play on the recorder. The room filled with static, then Captain Victor Hayes's voice, cold and deliberate. "Sullivan's too clean. Plant the drugs in his locker. No one will question it." The words landed like a grenade, each syllable confirming Jake's worst fears. His mentor, the man who'd pinned his badge on him 10 years ago, had orchestrated his downfall. Jake's fists clenched, his voice low but raw. "That's Hayes. My captain. He set me up." Ellison's eyes narrowed, her expression unreadable. "This is damning, Sullivan. But it's not enough to overturn your conviction. Not yet." She leaned forward, her voice sharp. "If Hayes did this, he had help. Who else is involved?" Before Jake could answer, a deafening explosion rocked the courthouse. The windows shattered, glass spraying like shrapnel. The room plunged into chaos. Papers flew, the desk lurched, and a piercing alarm wailed. Blaze shot to his feet, barking furiously, his hackles raised. Jake grabbed Emily, pulling her to the floor as dust and smoke poured in. "Jake!" Emily coughed, her voice hoarse. "That was no accident!" Judge Ellison struggled to her feet, blood trickling from a cut on her forehead. "Get to the holding cells," she shouted. "This is a targeted attack." Jake's mind raced. Hayes. This had to be his move to silence them. He whistled sharply, and Blaze pressed against his side, ready to move. "Stay close, boy," Jake said, his voice steady despite the panic clawing at him. He helped Ellison up, guiding her toward the door as Emily drew her service weapon, scanning the smoke-filled hall. The courthouse was a war zone. Officers shouted, civilians screamed, and the acrid smell of burning metal filled the air. Jake, Emily, and Blaze navigated the debris-strewn corridor, the judge trailing behind. Blaze's nose twitched, leading them toward an emergency exit. But as they rounded a corner, a figure emerged from the smoke, a man in tactical gear, his face masked, a silenced pistol raised. "Down!" Jake yelled, shoving Emily and Ellison behind a overturned desk. Blaze lunged, his jaws clamping onto the attacker's arm. The man grunted, his gun clattering to the floor as Blaze dragged him down. Jake dove forward, pinning the man and ripping off his mask. The face beneath was unfamiliar, but the cold eyes told Jake this was no random thug. This was a hired killer. "Who sent you?" Jake demanded, his voice a growl as he pressed his knee into the man's chest. The attacker smirked, blood trickling from his lip. "You're already dead, Sullivan." "You just don't know it," Blaze growled, his teeth inches from the man's throat. Emily, her gun trained on the attacker, glanced at Jake. "Jake, we can't stay here." "There'll be more." Jake nodded, his heart racing. He zip-tied the man's wrists with a cord from the desk, leaving him for the responders. But as they moved toward the exit, a second explosion shook the building, closer this time. The ceiling groaned, chunks of plaster raining down. Jake shielded Ellison, but a steel beam crashed inches from Blaze, who yelped and scrambled back. "Blaze!" Jake shouted, his voice cracking with fear. He dove to the dog's side, checking for injuries. Blaze whimpered but stood, his eyes still sharp, his loyalty unwavering. "Good boy," Jake whispered, his hand trembling as he stroked Blaze's fur. "You're okay." Ellison, coughing through the dust, grabbed Jake's arm. "Sullivan, listen to me. That recorder, it's not just about Hayes. There's a name in the precinct files, Lillian Monroe. She's been funneling money through Hayes for years." Jake froze, the name hitting like a shockwave. Lillian Monroe, the city councilwoman with her polished speeches and promises to clean up Havenport. The woman who'd shaken his hand at a fundraiser, her smile never reaching her eyes. "Monroe," he said, his voice barely audible. "She's behind this?" Ellison nodded, her face grim. "I've seen her name in sealed reports. She's untouchable, unless you find proof. Get to the precinct, Hayes' office. Whatever's there, it's your only shot." Emily's eyes widened. "Jake, if Monroe's involved, this goes way beyond a frame job. She's got the mayor, the DA, everyone in her pocket." Another tremor shook the building, and the sound of approaching boots echoed through the smoke. Jake's resolve hardened, his sister Ellie's face flashing in his mind. She'd died because of Havenport's corruption, and now Jake was in the crosshairs of the same machine. He wouldn't let it win. Get the judge to safety," Jake said, his voice firm. "Blaze and I are going for Hayes' office." Emily grabbed his arm, her eyes fierce. "Jake, you're not going alone. We're a team, remember? You, me, Blaze. We do this together." Jake hesitated, then nodded, the weight of her loyalty anchoring him. "All right. But we move fast. Hayes won't wait for us to catch up." Blaze barked, his stance rigid, as if urging them to act. Jake glanced at Ellison, who gave a curt nod. "Go," she said. "I'll handle things here. But Sullivan, be careful." Monroe doesn't play games. As they slipped through the emergency exit into the chaos of Havenport streets, Jake's mind churned. The explosions, the assassin, Monroe's name, it was all connected. But the biggest shock was yet to come. Tucked in Jake's pocket, the burner phone from Emily's bag buzzed with a new message, one that made his blood run cold. Ellie was no accident. Find the ledger. Someone was still feeding them clues, but this one cut deeper than any bullet. Ellie's death, the wound that had defined Jake's life, was tied to this conspiracy. And he'd tear Havenport apart to prove it. The rain pounded Havenport streets, turning the night into a blur of neon and shadow. Jake Sullivan, Emily Carter, and Blaze huddled in an abandoned warehouse on the city's edge, the air heavy with the smell of rust and mildew. The courthouse explosion still echoed in Jake's mind, glass shattering, Blaze's yelp, Judge Ellison's revelation about Lillian Monroe. The burner phone's latest message burned hotter. Ellie was no accident. Find the ledger. His sister's death, ruled an overdose, was no random tragedy. It was murder, tied to the same corruption that had framed him. Jake crouched beside a crate, his clothes damp and torn, his eyes scanning the dark. Blaze sat alert, his German shepherd instincts razor-sharp, ears twitching at every creak of the old building. Emily, her detective's instincts on overdrive, spread out their meager evidence on a rusted table. The recorder, the burner phone, and a grainy photo Jake had grabbed from his locker before the trial. A shot of Captain Victor Hayes shaking hands with Rafael Torres, a notorious drug lord. "This is bigger than we thought," Emily said, her voice low but urgent. "Hayes isn't just framing you, Jake. He's running fentanyl for Torres, and if Monroe's involved, she's bankrolling the whole operation." Jake's jaw clenched, his fingers tracing the photo's edges. "Ellie died because of this poison. I swore I'd stop it, Em. Now it's personal." Blaze nudged Jake's hand, his warm muzzle a quiet comfort. Jake scratched behind the dog's ears, drawing strength from their bond. "You're with me, right, boy?" Blaze's tail thumped once, his eyes steady, as if promising to fight to the end. Emily pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket, the note Blaze had sniffed out in the holding cell, scrawled with "Check Hayes's desk, second drawer." "We need to get into the precinct," she said. "Whatever's in that drawer, it's our next move. But Hayes will have eyes everywhere after the explosion." Jake nodded, his mind racing. The precinct was a lion's den, crawling with Hayes's loyalists like Detective Mark Lucas. But the ledger mentioned in the burner phone's message was their best shot at tying Hayes to Torres, and maybe to Ellie's death. "We go tonight," he said, "before Hayes covers his tracks." Emily's eyes flickered with doubt, but her voice was firm. "All right, but we're walking into a trap, Jake. You know that." "I know," Jake said, meeting her gaze. "But I'm done running. For Ellie, for Blaze. For us." The precinct loomed like a fortress under the storm, its windows dark except for a faint glow from Hayes's office. Jake, Emily, and Blaze slipped through a side alley, avoiding the security cameras. Blaze moved like a shadow, his nose low, guiding them past a patrol car. Jake's heart pounded, every step a gamble. If they were caught, there'd be no second chances. Inside, the precinct was eerily quiet, the hum of fluorescent lights the only sound. They crept toward Hayes' office, Blaze's claws silent on the linoleum. Emily picked the lock with practiced ease, her hands steady despite the tension. The door creaked open, revealing a cluttered desk, files stacked high, and a framed photo of Hayes with Lillian Monroe at a city gala. "Second drawer," Jake whispered, kneeling beside the desk. Blaze stood guard, his ears perked. Jake tugged the drawer open, revealing a leather-bound ledger, its pages filled with coded transactions, dates, amounts, initials. T for Rafael Torres, LM for Lillian Monroe, and one entry that stopped Jake cold, ES 2015 OD. Cleaned. Ellie Sullivan. His sister's initials, the year she died, marked as a deliberate hit. "Jake," Emily whispered, her voice breaking as she read over his shoulder. "They killed her. They covered it up." Jake's vision blurred, rage and grief colliding. "Hayes." "Monroe. They're gonna pay." Blaze's sudden growl cut through the haze. The dog's hackles rose, his nose pointing toward the door. Footsteps echoed in the hall, multiple sets, heavy and fast. Jake stuffed the ledger into his jacket, his pulse racing. "We've got company." Emily drew her gun, her face pale but resolute. "Lucas. Has to be." The door burst open, and Detective Mark Lucas, Hayes's right-hand man, stood flanked by two armed officers. Lucas, mid-30s with a smug grin, aimed his pistol at Jake. Well, Sullivan, breaking and entering, you're making this too easy." Blaze lunged, his jaws snapping inches from Lucas's leg. The detective stumbled back, cursing. "Call off your mutt, or I swear I'll shoot him." "Blaze, stand down," Jake said, his voice calm but lethal. Blaze retreated, growling, his eyes locked on Lucas. Jake stepped forward, the ledger burning against his chest. "You're in deep with Hayes, aren't you? This ledger's got your name all over it." Lucas's grin faltered, but he recovered quickly. "You're a dead man, Sullivan. You and your little detective friend. Hand it over or we do this the hard way." Emily's voice cut through the standoff, steady and fierce. "You're not walking away from this, Lucas. That ledger's going to the feds. You're done." The officers behind Lucas shifted, their hands twitching toward their guns. Jake's mind raced, calculating their odds. 3 against 2, plus Blaze. Not great, but he'd faced worse. Then Blaze's ears twitched, his growl deepening. A faint beep echoed from the desk, a hidden alarm Hayes had triggered remotely. "They knew we were coming," Jake said, his voice low. This was a setup. Before Lucas could respond, Blaze darted forward, slamming into one of the officers. The man yelped, his gun skittering across the floor. Jake tackled Lucas, pinning him as Emily disarmed the second officer. But the beep grew louder, joined by a hiss of gas from the vents. Smoke poured in, thick and choking, stinging their eyes. "Jake, we gotta go," Emily coughed, grabbing the ledger from Jake's jacket. Blaze barked, leading them toward a window. Jake smashed it open with a chair, the glass shattering into the rain-soaked night. They climbed out, gasping for air, Blaze leaping after them. As they sprinted into the alley, Jake's mind churned. The ledger was proof. Hayes, Monroe, Torres, and Ellie's murder, all connected. But Lucas's ambush and the gas meant someone was always one step ahead. Then it hit him. The notes, the burner phone. Their mysterious tipster wasn't just helping. They were playing both sides, feeding Jake just enough to keep him chasing, but not enough to win. Jake said, his voice hoarse as they ducked behind a dumpster. "Whoever's sending these clues, they're not our friend. They're using us." Emily's eyes widened, the ledger clutched to her chest. "Then who are they?" "And what do they want?" Blaze growled, his nose pointing toward the precinct. Headlights flared in the distance, more of Hayes' men closing in. Jake gripped Blaze's leash, his resolve hardening. "We find out, but first, we survive." The rain had stopped, leaving Havenport's docks shrouded in a heavy mist that clung to the skin. Jake Sullivan, Emily Carter, and Blaze crouched behind a stack of rusted shipping containers, the ledger from Hayes's office tucked inside Jake's jacket. Its pages burned in his mind, dates, payoffs, and the chilling entry about his sister Ellie's murder, marked as a deliberate hit. The precinct ambush had nearly killed them, and the realization that their mysterious tipster was playing a double game added a new layer of dread. Whoever was feeding them clues, through notes and burner phones, wasn't just helping. They were manipulating the board, and Jake was tired of being a pawn. Blaze, his German shepherd, stood alert, his black and tan coat blending into the shadows. His nose twitched, catching scents on the damp air, his eyes scanning the docks where cranes loomed like skeletal giants. Jake rested a hand on Blaze's back, the dog's steady presence grounding him. "You smell trouble, boy," he whispered. Blaze's ears flicked, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Emily, her detective's instincts razor-sharp, checked her gun, her face pale under the faint glow of a distant sodium lamp. "That ledger ties Hayes to Torres," she said, her voice low. "But it's not enough to bring down Monroe. We need hard proof she's running this show." Jake nodded, his jaw tight. Lillian Monroe, the untouchable city councilwoman, was the key. The ledger's initials, LM, pointed to her, but they needed something undeniable, something to crack her polished facade. "The docks," Jake said. "Torres runs his fentanyl through here. If Monroe's involved, there'll be evidence, documents, recordings, something." Emily's eyes flickered with doubt. "Jake, this place is a fortress. Torres has armed guards, cameras, the works. And after the precinct, Hayes knows we're coming." "Then we move fast," Jake said, his voice firm. "Blaze can get us in. He's trained for this." Blaze's tail thumped once, as if agreeing. Jake clipped a tracker collar onto the dog, a precaution in case they got separated. "Lead the way, boy," he said, and Blaze took off, his nose low, weaving through the maze of containers with silent precision. The docks were a labyrinth of steel and salt, the air thick with the stench of diesel and fish. Jake and Emily followed Blaze, their footsteps muffled by the mist. The dog paused at a locked warehouse, its corrugated walls streaked with rust. Blaze's nose pressed against the door, a sharp bark breaking the silence. Jake knelt, inspecting the lock. A heavy padlock, but old, vulnerable to a pick. "Cover me," Jake whispered, pulling a lockpick from his pocket. Emily nodded, her gun raised, scanning the shadows. Blaze stood guard, his hackles up, sensing danger before they could see it. The lock clicked open, and they slipped inside. The warehouse was cavernous, stacked with crates marked as medical supplies. Jake's gut twisted, Torres' cover for fentanyl. Blaze darted to a crate in the corner, pawing at it, his growl deepening. Jake pried it open, revealing plastic bags filled with white powder. "Fentanyl," he said, his voice grim. "Enough to kill half of Havenport." Emily's face hardened. "This is what killed Ellie. They're poisoning the whole city." Before Jake could respond, Blaze's ears shot up, his body tensing. He bolted toward a side door, barking furiously. Jake and Emily followed, finding a small office tucked behind a partition. Inside, a computer hummed, its screen locked but active. Emily slid into the chair, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "I can hack this," she said. "Give me 2 minutes." Jake stood watch, Blaze at his side, the dog's growls growing louder. The mist outside shifted, revealing silhouettes. Armed men, closing in. We're out of time," Jake said, his voice urgent. "Got it," Emily whispered, plugging in a USB drive. The screen flickered, revealing a CCTV feed. Rafael Torres handing a briefcase to none other than Lillian Monroe, her polished suit unmistakable. Another file loaded, a ledger matching the one in Jake's jacket, but with more names, including a bombshell. EC 2015, informant silenced. Emily Carter. Jake's blood ran cold. Look at this." Emily froze, her eyes locked on the screen. Her voice trembled. They targeted me too. My brother, Tom. He was an informant. Died the same year as Ellie. I thought it was an accident. Jake grabbed her shoulder, his voice fierce. They played us both, Ellie, Tom. They're cleaning up anyone who gets too close. Blaze's bark cut through their shock, sharp and urgent. The side door burst open, and 3 of Torres's men stormed in, guns drawn. "Hands up!" one shouted, his voice thick with menace. Jake dove behind a crate, pulling Emily with him. Blaze lunged, tackling the lead gunman, his jaws clamping onto the man's arm. The gunman screamed, his weapon clattering to the floor. Jake fired, taking down the second man, but the third opened fire, bullets pinging off the crates. Emily returned fire, her hands steady despite the tears in her eyes. "Jake, get the drive," she shouted, covering him. Jake scrambled to the computer, yanking the USB free. Blaze dragged the first gunman down, but more footsteps echoed outside. Reinforcements. "Blaze, come!" Jake called, and the dog sprinted to his side, blood on his muzzle, but unharmed. They bolted for the back exit, the warehouse erupting in chaos. Gunfire chased them, sparks flying as bullets struck metal. Jake's heart pounded, the USB and ledger their only hope. They burst into the mist, sprinting toward the dock's edge, but a black SUV screeched to a stop, blocking their path. Detective Mark Lucas stepped out, his gun trained on Jake. "End of the line, Sullivan," Lucas sneered. "Hand over the evidence or your dog's first to go." Blaze growled, ready to pounce, but Jake held him back, his mind racing. Then a new voice cut through the mist, low and chilling. "Stand down, Lucas." Lillian Monroe emerged from the SUV, her polished demeanor replaced by cold authority. "I'll handle this." Jake's stomach dropped. Monroe, here, in the open. The CCTV was real. She was the puppet master. But her next words were a gut punch. "You should have stayed in that cell, Sullivan," she said, her smile venomous. "Your sister was a warning." "You didn't listen." Emily's voice cracked, raw with fury. "You killed Tom. You killed Ellie." "For what? Money? Power?" Monroe's eyes glinted. "For control. Havenport's mine, and you're just collateral." Blaze's growl deepened, his body coiled. Jake gripped the USB, his resolve ironclad. Monroe was the key, but they were cornered. Then a faint beep sounded from Blaze's tracker collar. A signal. Their tipster, whoever they were, had activated it. Someone was watching, and Jake had a split second to act. "Blaze now!" Jake shouted. The dog launched at Lucas, knocking him down. Jake tackled Monroe, wrestling her gun away as Emily fired at the SUV's tires, flattening them. The mist swallowed their escape, but Monroe's chilling laugh echoed behind them. "You can't run forever, Sullivan." As they vanished into the night, Jake's mind churned. The tipster had saved them. But why? And how deep did Monroe's control go? The safe house was a crumbling cabin on the outskirts of Havenport, its warped wooden walls barely holding back the damp Oregon night. Jake Sullivan sat at a rickety table, the stolen ledger and USB drive spread before him, their contents a roadmap to the corruption strangling the city. His German shepherd Blaze lay at his feet, ears twitching, still blood-streaked from their escape at the docks. Emily Carter paced the room, her face drawn, the weight of their discoveries crushing her. The CCTV footage of Lillian Monroe with Rafael Torres, the ledger tying her to Ellie's murder and Emily's brother Tom's death. It was all too much, and Monroe's chilling words at the docks echoed in Jake's mind. Havenport's mine. "You're just collateral." Jake's fingers traced the ledger's coded entries, his jaw tight. "Monroe's not just bankrolling Torres," he said, his voice low, raw. "She's running the whole operation. Hayes, Lucas, the fentanyl. And she killed Ellie to keep it quiet." Emily stopped pacing, her eyes red from unshed tears. "And Tom," she whispered. "My brother was an informant, trying to expose her. I thought his overdose was his fault, All this time I blamed him. Jake reached for her hand, his grip firm. We're gonna make this right, Em. For Ellie, for Tom, for everyone they've hurt. Blaze lifted his head, a low growl rumbling as he sniffed the air. Jake's pulse quickened. The dog's instincts had saved them too many times to ignore. "What is it, boy?" he asked, standing. Blaze padded to the window, his hackles up, staring into the dark. Emily drew her gun, her voice tense. "They found us, didn't they?" Before Jake could answer, the burner phone in his pocket buzzed. He pulled it out, the screen glowing with a new message. "Check the USB. File 23, now." The tipster again, always one step ahead, but their cryptic games were wearing thin. Jake grabbed the USB, plugging it into Emily's battered laptop. The screen flickered, loading a hidden file labeled 23 Insurance. It was an audio clip, time-stamped a month ago. Jake hit play, and Lillian Monroe's voice filled the room, smooth but venomous. "Hayes, you're slipping. Sullivan's getting too close. If he digs up the old case, we're done." Another voice, Captain Victor Hayes, replied, "I'll handle him, just like we handled his sister." Emily gasped, her hand covering her mouth. Jake's vision tunneled, rage boiling in his chest. But the clip wasn't done. A third voice, familiar yet shocking, cut in. "You're both amateurs. I've been cleaning up your messes for years." It was Emily's voice, Emily Carter, his partner, his friend. Jake spun to face her, his heart plummeting. "Em, what the hell is this?" Emily's face drained of color, her eyes wide with horror. "Jake, I swear that's not me." "I never said that. I'd never—" Blaze growled, his body tensing, but his eyes darted between Jake and Emily, confused. Jake's mind raced, the audio looping in his head. "The files on your USB, Em, recorded a month ago. Explain it." Tears spilled down Emily's cheeks, her voice breaking. "Jake, you know me. I've been with you every step. Blaze, the precinct, the docks. Someone faked this. They're trying to tear us apart." Jake wanted to believe her, but doubt gnawed at him. The tipster's messages, the perfectly timed clues. Someone was orchestrating this, and Emily had been their conduit. "Then who, Em?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "Who's close enough to fake your voice, plant this file, and know exactly where we are?" Before she could answer, a crash shattered the silence. The cabin's door splintered as 3 armed men burst in, their faces masked, guns raised. "Down!" one shouted, firing a warning shot that grazed the ceiling. Jake dove for cover, pulling Blaze behind the table. Emily rolled to the floor, her gun drawn, but her eyes were locked on Jake, pleading. "Jake, please," she whispered, her voice raw. "I'm not the enemy." Blaze lunged, tackling one of the gunmen, his jaws clamping onto the man's arm. The attacker screamed, dropping his weapon. Jake fired, taking down the second man, but the third aimed at Emily. She shot first, her bullet hitting his shoulder, but more footsteps pounded outside. Reinforcements. "We're pinned!" Emily shouted, reloading. "We need to move!" Jake's mind churned. The audio, Emily's voice. It didn't add up, but he couldn't trust her, not fully. Yet Blaze hadn't turned on her, and that was the only thing keeping Jake from losing it. "Blaze, with me!" he called, grabbing the ledger and USB. He kicked open a back window, the glass shattering into the night. Emily hesitated, her gun still raised. "Jake, if you don't trust me, we're dead. Both of us." Jake met her gaze, his heart tearing. "Then prove it, Em. Get us out of here." They climbed through the window, Blaze leaping after them, his tracker collar beeping faintly. The mist swallowed them as they sprinted into the woods, gunfire echoing behind. Jake's lungs burned, the weight of betrayal crushing him. Emily had been his rock, but the audio was a knife in his back. Was she a traitor, or another victim of Monroe's game? They ducked behind a fallen log, catching their breath. Blaze pressed against Jake, his growl low, sensing danger in every shadow. Emily's voice was barely audible, thick with emotion. "Jake, I loved Tom. He was all I had. I'd never protect the people who killed him, or Ellie. You have to believe me." Jake's eyes searched hers, desperate for truth. "Then who's doing this, Emmy? Who knows us this well?" Before she could answer, Blaze's collar beeped louder, the tracker signal spiking. Jake checked it, his stomach dropping. The signal wasn't just active, it was broadcasting their location. The tipster hadn't just saved them at the docks. They'd been tracking them, leading Monroe's men straight to the safe house. "They played us," Jake said, ripping the collar off Blaze. The tipster's working for Monroe. Emily's face crumpled, guilt and fear colliding. "Jake, I'm so sorry. I brought the USB." "I didn't know." Jake cut her off, his voice hard, but not cruel. "We deal with it later. Right now, we run." Headlights pierced the mist, engines roaring as Monroe's men closed in. Jake crushed the collar under his boot, grabbed Blaze's leash, and pulled Emily to her feet. The audio was a lie, or maybe it wasn't. But one thing was clear. Monroe was tightening the noose, and their mysterious puppeteer was pulling the strings. As they vanished into the dark, Jake's resolve burned brighter. He'd find the truth, for Ellie, for Blaze, and for the friend he prayed wasn't his enemy. The Havenport docks were a maze of steel and salt, the air thick with fog and the tang of diesel. Jake Sullivan crouched behind a rusted crane, his heart pounding as he clutched the ledger and USB drive, the keys to exposing Lillian Monroe's empire. His German shepherd Blaze pressed against his side, ears perked, his black and tan coat blending into the shadows. Emily Carter knelt nearby, her gun drawn, her face etched with guilt after the safe house betrayal. The audio file implicating her had been a fake, planted to fracture their trust, but the sting of doubt lingered. Their tipster, revealed as Monroe's pawn, had led them into this trap, and now the final showdown loomed. Jake's breath was visible in the chilly night, his mind racing. The ledger tied Monroe to Rafael Torres' fentanyl ring and the murders of his sister Ellie and Emily's brother Tom. The USB's CCTV footage showed Monroe orchestrating it all, with Captain Victor Hayes and Detective Mark Lucas as her enforcers. But Monroe was here, at the docks, overseeing a massive shipment, her last play before disappearing. Jake knew this was their only shot to bring her down. "Jake," Emily whispered, her voice trembling but resolute. "If we don't stop her now, she'll vanish. Ellie, Tom, they'll never get justice." Jake met her gaze, the weight of their shared loss binding them. "We end this tonight, Em, for them, for Havenport." Blaze growled softly, his nose twitching as he caught a scent. Jake checked the docks. A freighter loomed in the mist, its deck crawling with Torres' armed men. Monroe's black SUV was parked nearby, its tinted windows glinting under sodium lights. Hayes and Lucas were there too, their silhouettes unmistakable. The shipment was massive, crates of fentanyl ready to flood the city. Jake's resolve hardened. This poison had killed Ellie, and he wouldn't let it claim more lives. "Blaze can get us close," Jake said, clipping a new leash to the dog's collar, the tracker destroyed after the safe house. "He'll sniff out the guards. We hit Monroe before she bolts." Emily nodded, her eyes fierce. "I've got your back, Jake." No matter what. They moved like ghosts, Blaze leading the way, his paws silent on the wet concrete. The dog's training kicked in, weaving past patrols, his nose guiding them to a gap in the security. Jake's heart pounded, every shadow a potential threat. They reached a stack of crates near the freighter, close enough to hear Monroe's voice, sharp and commanding. "Move faster," Monroe snapped, her polished suit out of place among the grime. "The feds are sniffing around." "This shipment leaves tonight." Hayes, standing beside her, adjusted his holster. "Sullivan's still out there, Lillian. He's got the ledger." Monroe's smile was ice. "Then we bury him, like we buried his sister." Jake's blood boiled, his grip tightening on his gun. Blaze sensed his rage, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Emily touched Jake's arm, her voice a whisper. "We need to split them up. I'll draw Lucas out. You and Blaze go for Monroe." Jake hesitated, the audio file's echo still nagging at him. But Blaze nuzzled Emily's hand, his trust unwavering, and that was enough. "Be careful, Em," Jake said, his voice thick. "Your family." Emily's eyes glistened, but she nodded. "You too, Jake. Let's finish this." She slipped away, firing a shot into the air. The docks erupted. Guards shouted, boots pounding as Lucas took the bait, chasing her into the mist. Jake whistled softly, and Blaze darted forward, leading him toward Monroe and Hayes. The dog's speed was a blur, dodging crates until they were feet from the SUV. Monroe stood by the vehicle, barking orders, unaware of the storm closing in. Jake raised his gun, stepping into the open. "Monroe!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "It's over. The ledger, the footage, I've got it all." Monroe spun, her eyes narrowing, but her smile didn't falter. "Sullivan." "You're persistent. I'll give you that." She raised a hand and Hayes drew his weapon, aiming at Jake. Blaze lunged, his jaws clamping onto Hayes's arm. The captain screamed, his gun firing wild, the bullet grazing Jake's shoulder. Pain seared through him, but he didn't flinch, tackling Hayes to the ground. Blaze held firm, pinning the captain as Jake zip-tied his wrists. Monroe laughed, cold and sharp, pulling a pistol from her coat. "You think you've won? You're nothing, Sullivan. This city's mine." Before she could fire, a gunshot rang out from the mist. Monroe staggered, clutching her side, her gun clattering to the deck. Emily emerged, her face grim, her weapon smoking. "That's for Tom," she said, her voice breaking. Monroe collapsed, blood pooling beneath her, but her eyes still burned with defiance. "You'll never stop it," she gasped. "There's always another me." Jake knelt beside her, his voice low, fierce. "Not in my city." He pulled out his phone, hitting send on an email to the FBI, every file, every piece of evidence, uploaded from the USB. Sirens wailed in the distance, red and blue lights piercing the fog. The feds were here. But the chaos wasn't over. Lucas, bloodied from his fight with Emily, charged from the shadows, a knife in hand, aiming for Jake. Blaze reacted faster, leaping with a snarl, his jaws closing on Lucas's wrist. The detective screamed, the knife falling as Blaze dragged him down. Jake cuffed him, his shoulder throbbing, his breath ragged. Emily ran to Jake, her hands shaking as she checked his wound. "Jake, you're hit." We need to get you out of here. Jake shook his head, his eyes on Blaze, who stood over Lucas, growling. I'm fine, Emmy. Blaze got us through. He knelt beside the dog, ruffling his fur, his voice thick with gratitude. You're the real hero, boy. The feds swarmed the docks, arresting Torres' men and securing Monroe, Hayes, and Lucas. Jake handed over the ledger and USB, the evidence airtight. But as Monroe was loaded into an ambulance, her words lingered. There's always another me. Jake's gut twisted. Was there another layer to this, or was she just taunting him? Emily's voice pulled him back, soft but urgent. Jake, we did it. Ellie, Tom, they can rest now. Jake nodded, but his eyes were distant. Yeah, but at what cost, Em? He looked at Blaze, the dog's steady gaze anchoring him. The fight was over, but the scars would linger. As the feds cleared the scene, a new figure emerged from the mist. A woman in a hooded jacket, her face obscured. She dropped a burner phone at the dock's edge and vanished. Jake picked it up, the screen flashing a final message. You're welcome, but it's not over. The tipster, still out there, had orchestrated their victory. But why? And what did they mean? Jake crushed the phone under his boot, his resolve unbroken. Let's go home, Blaze, he said, his voice steady. The war for Havenport wasn't over, but tonight, justice had won. The sun hung low over Havenport, casting a golden glow across the K-9 training field, a rare moment of peace in a city scarred by corruption. Jake Sullivan stood on the grass, his shoulder bandaged from the dockside fight, his eyes softer than they'd been in months. His German Shepherd Blaze bounded after a tennis ball, his black and tan coat gleaming, his joyful barks echoing through the open air. The weight of their victory, exposing Lillian Monroe, Captain Victor Hayes, and Rafael Torres, still felt surreal, but the cost lingered in Jake's heart. Ellie, his sister, and Tom, Emily's brother, had their justice, but the wounds they'd left behind would take time to heal. Emily Carter, now interim captain of the Havenport precinct, leaned against a fence, her dark hair catching the breeze. Her promotion came after Hayes's arrest, a chance to rebuild a department rotten with betrayal. She watched Jake and Blaze, a faint smile breaking through her usual intensity. The ledger and USB sent to the FBI had dismantled Monroe's empire, leading to arrests across the city, from dirty cops to Torres's lieutenants. Monroe herself was in a federal holding cell, her polished facade shattered. Jake tossed the ball again, Blaze leaping to catch it midair. "Good boy," Jake called, his voice warm, a stark contrast to the rage that had driven him through the docks. He walked over to Emily, wiping sweat from his brow. "You ever think we'd make it here, Em? After everything?" Emily's smile faded, her eyes distant. "I didn't. Not after that audio file. I thought you'd never trust me again." Jake's chest tightened, the memory of the faked recording. Emily's voice implicating her in Monroe's scheme, still raw. "I wanted to believe you, Em. Blaze did too. That's what got me through." Blaze dropped the ball at Jake's feet, nudging his hand with a wet nose. Jake knelt, ruffling the dog's fur, his voice thick. "You knew, didn't you, boy? You never doubted her." Emily crouched beside them, her hand brushing Blaze's back. "He's the real hero, Jake. Saved us both, more times than I can count." Jake nodded, his gaze drifting to the field where a group of new K-9 recruits trained, their handlers shouting commands. The program, named the Ellie Sullivan K-9 Initiative, was Jake's tribute to his sister, a way to fight the drug epidemic that had taken her life. Every dog, every officer, was a step toward cleaning Havenport's streets. "Ellie would have loved this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She always said dogs were better than people." Emily's eyes glistened, her voice cracking. "Tom would have been proud, too. He wanted to fix this city, just like you. I just wish I'd seen the truth sooner." Jake reached for her hand, his grip steady. "You did, Em. You fought for us. That's what matters." A young officer approached, holding a clipboard. "Captain Carter, the mayor's on the line. Wants to talk about the initiative's funding." Emily sighed, standing. "Duty calls." "You good here, Jake?" "Go," Jake said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Blaze and I got this." As Emily walked off, Jake tossed the ball again, watching Blaze sprint across the field. The moment felt like a gift, a chance to breathe after months of running, fighting, and doubting. But beneath the calm, a nagging unease lingered. The tipster's final message, "You're welcome, but it's not over," haunted him. Who were they? A rogue ally, or another enemy waiting in the wings? Monroe had hinted at a larger network, and Jake couldn't shake the feeling that Havenport's shadows still hid secrets. Blaze returned, dropping the ball and sitting proudly. Jake knelt, cupping the dog's face, his voice low, intimate. "We did it, boy. We got justice for Ellie. But I need you to keep those eyes sharp, okay? We're not done yet." Blaze tilted his head, his intelligent eyes locking with Jake's, as if promising to stay vigilant. The dog's loyalty, unwavering through every betrayal, was Jake's anchor. He stood, his shoulder aching but his resolve unbroken, and started toward the training office. But a faint rustle in the nearby trees stopped him cold. Blaze's ears shot up, a growl rumbling in his throat. Jake's hand went to his side, where his gun would have been if he weren't off duty. "Easy, boy," he whispered, scanning the tree line. A figure moved in the shadows, a woman, her face obscured by a hood, just like the one at the docks. She stepped forward, dropping a small envelope onto the grass before vanishing into the woods. Jake's pulse raced. He whistled for Blaze, who stayed close as he approached the envelope. Inside was a single photo, a younger Lillian Monroe standing beside a man Jake didn't recognize, their hands clasped in a deal. Scrawled on the back were two words, "Look higher." The tipster, still playing their game, was pointing to someone above Monroe, someone who'd stayed hidden through it all. "Jake?" Emily's voice called from the office, pulling him back. She jogged over, her brow furrowing as she saw the photo. "What's that?" Jake handed it to her, his voice grim. "Our tipster's back. They're saying Monroe wasn't the top dog." Emily's face paled, her fingers tightening on the photo. "Jake, we took down the whole network." "Torres, Hayes, Monroe. Who else could there be?" "I don't know," Jake said, his eyes on Blaze, who still stared at the trees, growling. "But they know us. They've been watching every move." Emily's voice trembled, but her resolve held. "Then we keep fighting, together, right?" Jake nodded, his hand resting on Blaze's head. "Together. Always." The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the field. Jake tucked the photo into his pocket, the weight of a new battle settling in. Havenport was healing, but the war wasn't over. Blaze pressed against his leg, a silent vow to face whatever came next. Jake looked out at the city, its lights flickering like stars, and spoke to the audience beyond the frame. "You've seen what Blaze and I went through," he said, his voice steady, emotional. "Loyalty got us here, through betrayal, through pain. What's your story? Who's been your Blaze, standing by you when the world turned dark? Share it with us. Let's keep this fight alive." Blaze barked, his tail wagging, as if urging the world to answer. Jake smiled, a rare moment of hope. But the photo in his pocket burned with unanswered questions. The truth was out there, and he'd find it, no matter the cost. The Havenport precinct buzzed with a cautious hope, its halls no longer shadowed by the corruption that had festered for years. Jake Sullivan stood in the K-9 training yard, the late afternoon sun painting the grass gold. His German shepherd, Blaze, sat proudly at his side, his black and tan coat gleaming, his eyes bright with the same unshakable loyalty that had carried them through the darkest nights. The Ellie Sullivan K-9 initiative was in full swing, a dozen new recruits, both human and canine, training under Jake's watchful eye. Each bark, each command, was a step toward a cleaner city, a promise kept to his sister's memory. Emily Carter, now officially Captain Carter, leaned against a nearby fence, her badge glinting as she watched a young officer work with a rookie German shepherd. The arrests of Lillian Monroe, Captain Victor Hayes, Rafael Torres, and Detective Mark Lucas had rocked Havenport, exposing a fentanyl empire that reached from the docks to City Hall. The ledger and USB delivered to the FBI had sealed their fates, but the mysterious photo from the tipster, Monroe with an unknown man marked "Look Higher," lingered in Jake's mind. The war was won, but a new battle loomed. Jake tossed a ball for Blaze, who bounded after it with a joyful bark. "Still got it, boy," Jake said, a rare smile breaking through his rugged features. His shoulder, scarred from the dockside fight, ached less today, a reminder of how close they'd come to losing everything. He walked over to Emily, his boots crunching on the gravel. "You think Havenport's ready for a fresh start, Em?" Emily's eyes softened, but her voice carried the weight of their scars. "It's trying, Jake. We rooted out Monroe's network, but people are still scared. Trust doesn't come back overnight." Jake nodded, his gaze drifting to Blaze, who returned with the ball, dropping it at his feet. "Yeah, but we showed 'em what's possible. You, me, Blaze. We didn't give up." Emily's smile was bittersweet. "I almost lost you back there. That fake audio. I thought you'd hate me forever." Jake rested a hand on her shoulder, his voice low, steady. "Never, Em. You fought for Tom, for Ellie, for me. Blaze knew you were solid. That's why we're standing here." Blaze nudged Emily's leg, his tail wagging, as if forgiving her for the doubt that had nearly torn them apart. Emily knelt, scratching behind his ears, her voice thick. "You're the best partner anyone could ask for, Blaze. Don't let Jake take all the credit." Jake chuckled, but his expression sobered as he pulled the tipster's photo from his pocket. The image, Monroe and the unknown man, felt like a loose thread, a warning that their victory was incomplete. "This guy," he said, holding it up. "Whoever he is, he's still out there. The tipster wanted us to know." Emily's face tightened, her fingers brushing the photo's edge. "You think they're coming for us?" "After all this?" Jake's jaw clenched, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Maybe. But if they do, we'll be ready." "Right, Blaze." Blaze barked, his stance proud, as if vowing to face any threat. The moment was cut short by a shout from the training field. A young officer, Sarah, ran over, her face pale, Captain Carter, you need to see this. We found something in the evidence lockup. Jake and Emily exchanged a glance, Blaze's ears perking. They followed Sarah to the precinct's basement, where a steel locker held the last of Monroe's seized files. Sarah pointed to a small unmarked envelope tucked behind a stack of reports. It wasn't logged, she said. Showed up this morning. Jake's gut twisted. Another tipster drop. He opened the envelope, revealing a single flash drive and a note. They're watching. Trust no one. His pulse quickened as he handed the drive to Emily, who plugged it into a secure laptop. The screen flickered, loading a grainy video. The same unknown man from the photo, meeting with a high-ranking FBI agent in a dimly lit office. Their conversation was muted, but the man's gestures were clear. Orders, not requests. Emily's voice trembled. Jake, if this is real, the FBI's compromised. Someone's been protecting Monroe's network from the inside. Jake's mind raced. The tipster's words, "Look higher," now chillingly clear. The man wasn't just above Monroe. He was untouchable, embedded in the system meant to deliver justice. "We can't trust the feds," Jake said, his voice grim. "Not until we know who he is." Blaze growled, sensing Jake's tension, his eyes fixed on the door. Footsteps echoed in the hall, heavy, deliberate. Emily drew her gun, her face resolute. "Jake, if they're coming, we need to move the evidence, now." Jake nodded, pocketing the flash drive. "Sarah, lock this place down. No one gets in or out." He whistled for Blaze, who fell into step, ready for whatever came next. As they slipped out a side exit, the precinct's lights flickered, a faint hum signaling a power surge or sabotage. Outside, Havenport's skyline glowed against the dusk, a city fighting to heal. Jake paused, his hand on Blaze's head, his voice low, emotional. "We thought we'd won, Em. But this guy, he's the real puppet master, and he's not done with us." Emily's eyes burned with defiance. "Then we find him, Jake. For Ellie, for Tom, for every soul this city's lost. We don't stop." Jake's resolve hardened, Blaze's steady presence anchoring him. "Together," he said, his voice a vow. He turned to the audience, breaking the fourth wall, his gaze piercing. "You've seen our fight, Blaze and me, through betrayal, through blood. Loyalty kept us standing. Who's been your rock, your Blaze, when the world turned against you? Share your story below. Join us, because this fight's not over." The camera panned to Blaze, his bark ringing out, a call to action. A host stepped into frame, her voice warm, urgent. "Jake and Blaze showed us what it means to fight for justice, to never give up. Hit that subscribe button, like this video, and drop your stories in the comments. Your support keeps these tales alive. Let's build a community that stands for loyalty, for truth. Thank you for being here." As the host faded, Jake and Emily vanished into the night, Blaze at their side, the flash drive a ticking bomb in Jake's pocket. The sun sank, casting Havenport in shadow, but a new spark burned in Jake's heart. The tipster's game wasn't over, but neither was his. For Ellie, for Blaze, for Havenport, he'd keep fighting until every secret was dragged into the light.